Today, we are diving into a really provocative theory from our source material, one that gets right to the heart of biblical interpretation. It asks a pretty explosive question. Was the oral law created to explain the written Torah, or was it actually designed to systematically replace it? Okay, let's get into this.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the shocking accusation at the center of it all. Then we'll explore the so-called cancellation techniques. After that, we'll dig into the evidence, case by case. We'll even see how this argument extends to reshaping time itself. And finally, we'll wrap up with the big question this all raises about tradition.
All right, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get straight to the core claim. And you know, this isn't some minor disagreement over a detail or two. This is a fundamental challenge to the entire traditional framework.
Wow, this quote from our source material, it really just sets the tone, doesn't it? It's what the author concluded after a ton of research, and it perfectly frames the whole argument to come. It's this deep feeling of being betrayed.
And here it is, the central thesis laid out bare. The argument being made is that the sages' ultimate goal was to cancel the Torah's commandments, to create a whole new system, but do it so cleverly, using these complex legal frameworks, that it looked like a continuation. The source claims it was done in such a way that the original laws became, for all practical purposes, impossible to actually perform.
So, if that was the goal, how exactly was it supposedly done? I mean, how do you make a commandment just go away? This brings us to what the source calls the methods of cancellation.
According to the source, this wasn't some haphazard thing. It was a multi-pronged strategy, almost like a playbook for nullification. First, you reinterpret what a law actually means. If that doesn't work, you just add so many crazy, specific conditions that the law could never, ever apply in real life. The third tool in the toolbox? Create legal workarounds, these, well, fictions. And finally, if all else fails, you just declare a law as no longer applicable for our times.
Now, you can't make a claim that big without some evidence, right? Our source doesn't just make a broad statement, it tries to back it up with a long list of specific examples. So let's see how this argument gets built, piece by piece.
An eye for an eye is probably the most famous example of that first technique, reinterpretation. I mean, the written text seems pretty straightforward, right? It sounds like literal physical justice, but the oral law completely transforms it into a system of financial payment. From the source's point of view, that isn't an explanation. It's a total replacement of the original law's intent.
This table shows just a fraction of the examples that the source brings up. Let's just look at a few. Take the law of the rebellious son. The argument here is that the sages piled on so many detailed, almost ridiculous conditions about his age, the exact circumstances, what his parents had to do simultaneously, that it could never actually happen. Or how about the sabbatical debt release? It's a biblical law meant to be a financial reset button every 7 years. Well, it was bypassed using a legal document called a prosbul, which basically let lenders collect the debt anyway. From declaring some laws inapplicable to adding new requirements for others, the claim is that each one of these was a deliberate move to get around the original law.
And believe me, the list just keeps going, touching on pretty much every part of life. The source points to the commandment to wear a blue thread, techelet. The claim is this was nullified by insisting the dye had to come from one specific, super rare snail, a creature so mysterious its identity was lost for centuries, making the whole thing impossible. Another one is the owner of an ox that kills someone. The Torah prescribes a death penalty, but that gets reinterpreted as a divine punishment, taking it out of the hands of a human court when you add in the claim that the pronunciation of God's name was deliberately stopped, while the source argues the cumulative effect is a near-total rewrite of the biblical legal code.
Okay, but if you think those examples were a big deal, the next claim in our source material, this one goes beyond individual laws to something way more fundamental. It's about the very measurement of time itself.
The argument is actually pretty simple. The source claims that the original biblical calendar was solar-based, based on the sun, but the sages replaced it with a calendar based on the moon. Let's just see what that means in terms of numbers.
So, a solar year, which is what our modern calendar is based on, has about 365¼ days. Pretty standard stuff.
But a calendar based only on the moon's cycles is way shorter. It's only about 354 days. That means you get a drift of about 11 days every single year. Now, to be fair, the modern rabbinic calendar has a clever system of leap months to realign with the seasons over time, but the source's claim isn't about the fix. It's about the fundamental switch away from what it says was a purely solar model to begin with.
So what's the big deal? Why does this even matter? Well, the implication is massive.
The accusation is that by changing the entire system of timekeeping, the sages effectively moved every single biblical festival off of its original biblically mandated date. They fundamentally altered the entire rhythm of the year.
And all of this brings us to the final, and let's be honest, the most challenging part of this whole thing, the ultimate conclusion that our source material draws from all this evidence. So when you put all the pieces together, the picture our source paints is pretty stark. The claim is that this wasn't an evolution, it was a revolution. It wasn't about adapting old laws, it was about completely supplanting them. The perspective here is that the oral law basically created a new religion under the guise of interpreting an old one.
And that really is the question we're left with, isn't it? Whether you see all this as a faithful adaptation that was necessary for survival or as a deliberate nullification, like our source claims, it forces you to ask a really timeless question. What is the role of an interpreter? Is it to be a guardian, preserving the past, or is it to be an architect, building for the future?